All right, let's get right into it. We're going to unravel what is honestly one of the most successful stories humanity has ever told itself. And no, it's not about gods or kings or empires. It's about something you and I use every single day: money. And the big idea here, the one that might bend your brain a little, is that money isn't really a thing. It's an idea we all agree to believe in.
I mean, seriously, take a look at a dollar bill or any bill. What are you actually holding in your hand? If you ask a chemist, they'll tell you it's, some cotton, some linen. But if you ask an economist, well, they'll tell you something way, way stranger.
And that's the absolute core of it. Money, whether it's a shell, a coin, or a line of code, is just the physical form of our collective trust in each other. It might just be the only story that pretty much every single person on Earth agrees on. But to really get why that is, we have to rewind the clock, way back to a time before money even existed.
Our story kicks off in one of the world's very first big cities, a place called Uruk, around 3500 BCE. And they had a simple but totally paralyzing problem for a society that was trying to grow.
So picture this. You've got Enki, the weaver. He makes incredible blankets, but you can't eat blankets, right? He needs wheat from Zara the farmer. Simple enough, but Zara, she doesn't need a blanket. She needs a new plow blade. So now poor Enki has to wander around the city trying to find a blacksmith who just happens to need a blanket. It's a total mess. This is a massive headache, and it puts the brakes on the entire economy.
And this puzzle actually has a name. Economists call it the double coincidence of wants. For any trade to happen, two very specific things have to line up perfectly. In a small village, maybe that works. But in a city with thousands of people, it's pretty much impossible. Humanity desperately needed a better system, something to grease the wheels of trade.
So what did we do? We came up with our first big innovation: commodity money. The idea was simple. Let's find some stuff that pretty much everyone agrees has value, even if you don't need it right this second.
So what kind of stuff did we use? Well, in Mesopotamia, it was barley. Makes sense. Everyone's got to eat. Along the Indian Ocean, they used these beautiful cowrie shells. They were tough, durable, hard to fake. In other places, salt, even cattle. But each one had its pros and its major cons. I mean, you can't exactly break a cow in half to buy a loaf of bread.
And here's a cool little connection to your life right now. Roman soldiers were actually paid an allowance to buy salt, which in Latin was called a salarium. And yep, that's exactly where we get the word salary. So if a soldier wasn't doing his job, he was literally not worth his salt.
Now this next step was a game changer. Before coins, if you wanted to trade with, say, a lump of gold, it was a whole ordeal. You had to weigh it, test how pure it was, and basically just hope the merchant across from you wasn't ripping you off. But then, around 600 BCE, this king Alyattes of Lydia has a genius idea. What if I just stamp a standard-sized piece of metal with my royal seal? All of a sudden, you didn't have to trust the merchant anymore. You just had to trust the king. This was a technological revolution that basically put trade on hyperspeed.
Okay, so coins were a huge leap. But the next one was even bigger. And it was all mental. This is when we started to detach the whole idea of money from anything that had actual physical value. Let's jump ahead now to 11th century China, during the Song Dynasty. The economy is absolutely booming, but merchants trying to make huge deals literally had to use ox carts to haul around hundreds of pounds of iron coins. It was just ridiculous. They had to find a better way.
And the solution they came up with was a breakthrough called the jiaozi. Here's how it worked. A merchant would drop off his wagon full of heavy coins at a trusted deposit shop, and he'd get a paper receipt in return. And pretty soon, they all realized, hey, why don't we just trade the receipts instead of hauling the coins around? This was revolutionary. For the first time ever, something with basically zero value, a piece of paper, was being used as money. Its value was based on one thing and one thing only: a promise.
Now get this. Half a world away in 17th century Europe, goldsmiths kind of stumbled onto the exact same idea. People stored their gold with them for safekeeping and traded the paper receipts. But then the goldsmiths had a light bulb moment. They noticed that most of the gold just sat there. And they thought, wait a minute. What if we lend out more paper receipts than the gold we actually have in the vault? And just like that, fractional reserve banking was born. It's the foundation of our entire modern economy, and it literally created money out of thin air.
So for centuries, even with paper money, that promise was still tied, at least loosely, to a physical anchor: gold. But this next chapter is about the incredibly dramatic moment that connection was just severed. For good. So after World War II, most of the world agreed to a system:
Everybody's currency was pegged to the US dollar, and the dollar was pegged to gold. It was a way to keep governments honest. But by the late 60s, the US was printing way too many dollars, mostly to pay for the Vietnam War. Other countries got nervous and started saying, "Hey, we'd like our gold back now, please." So, on a Sunday night, August 15th, 1971, President Nixon got on TV and announced he was temporarily cutting the cord.
Well, that temporary suspension is still with us today. On that day, for the first time in history, every major currency on Earth became what's known as fiat money. That comes from the Latin for "let it be done." It wasn't backed by gold, it wasn't backed by silver, it wasn't backed by anything physical. Its value now comes from one source, and one source only: our shared belief and trust in the government that prints it. The story was now complete.
And that brings us right up to today. This total shift of money into just digital data created a whole new kind of problem, a problem of centralized trust, which in turn sparked a pretty radical new solution.
Think about this for a second. Right now, today, only about 8% of all the money in the world exists as physical cash and coins. The other 92%? It's just numbers in a database. It's entries on a bank's private computer server, flying around the world. But then the 2008 financial crisis happened, and for a lot of people, it completely shattered their trust in the big institutions keeping track of all those numbers.
And right in the middle of that chaos, an anonymous creator, or maybe a group of them, going by the name Satoshi Nakamoto, launched Bitcoin. And they left a message, a kind of digital battle cry, hidden forever in the very first batch of transactions. It was a headline from the London Times that day, a direct shot at the failure of the entire traditional banking system.
Satoshi's big solution was the blockchain. The idea was to create a whole new kind of money that didn't need a bank or a government to work. See, instead of one private list of transactions held by a single bank, the blockchain is a public list, a ledger that is copied and verified by a global network of thousands of computers.
So this is the really critical shift to understand. For 5,000 years, money has always required us to trust some central authority, a king stamping a coin, a bank holding the gold, a government printing the bills. Cryptocurrency proposes a totally new model. It says, don't trust people, trust math. The trust is placed in open-source computer code and a decentralized network where the ledger isn't hidden away, it's public for anyone to see. It's a complete reimagining of what trust even means.
So, from barley in ancient Samaria to coins in Lydia, from paper promises in China to pure digital code today, money has never, ever been a static thing. It's a technology. It's a tool that we are constantly upgrading to solve the big problems of our time. Problems of inefficiency, problems of scale, and most importantly, problems of trust. And that leaves us with one last fascinating question to think about. What problems, what frictions exist in our world right now that the next evolution of money will be invented to solve?
Please like and subscribe.